Congratulations on purchasing your QuietKat E-Bike. Now that we've got it here, let's go ahead and get her out of the box and go through the assembly process. First thing we'll do is go ahead and remove the straps that are holding the box together. Go ahead and hit these with a nice set of snips. Next thing we'll do is open the flap. Be careful of the staples as we open up the box. So again, be careful of the staples that you don't cut yourself while opening up the top of the box. Once you have the box fully opened, we can go ahead and remove the stabilizers and discard them. Next thing we'll do is locate the accessory box and set this aside. We're going to use this in the next step. Next thing we want to do is remove the front wheel. It is attached to the bike via some zip ties, so we want to very carefully remove the zip ties that are holding the front wheel to the frame. So once we've got the zip ties snipped, go ahead and carefully remove those. Make sure they're clear and out of the way. Very carefully lift the front wheel straight up. Remove those zip ties. Remove the protective covers. Go ahead and set the wheel aside for now. Next thing we'll do is go ahead and lift the bike straight up and out of the box. The easiest way to do this is to lift on the saddle, and with your other hand, you're going to lift just underneath the top tube, right up near where the handlebars attach. Be careful, this is a little bit heavy, and it does help if you have two people. Lift the bike straight up, and then we'll go ahead and get rid of the box. Now with the box out of the way, we can go ahead and set down the bike and get it ready to put in the stand. If you have a repair stand, now is the best time to go ahead and raise up the seat tube so you have enough room. Clamp it back down, make sure it's tight, and we can go ahead and install it in our stand. If you don't have a repair stand, you can do most of the rest of the assembly right here on the ground. It may help to have something to lean the bike against so it doesn't tip over. Next, we'll go ahead and remove the remainder of the packaging. There's a few more zip ties we need to clip, so make sure as you're cutting these zip ties that you don't cut your hydraulic brake lines. Next, locate your accessory box. That's the yellow and charcoal colored box here. We'll go ahead and take the plastic wrapping off of that. Open up the box, lift the lid straight up, and what you'll find inside are all the tools you need to assemble your bike. Inside the accessory box, you're going to find all the tools you need to assemble your QuietKat bike. You have a 15mm open-ended wrench, a 10mm open-ended wrench, 4mm hex key, and a 5mm hex key. You'll also find your pedals, your battery charger, and an extra classification sticker if you need to meet Class 1 regulations. These tools are great to keep around to do a lot of the work on your bike. The tools we'll be using in this video come from the QuietKat Professional Toolkit, which can be found at QuietKat.com. Next, we'll go ahead and get the handlebars into place. We don't need to get them aligned perfectly, but we'll go ahead and get them mounted into the stem. We'll start by removing the 4 bolts that hold the stem bracket onto the front. That way we can put the handlebar in place and put the stem bracket back on. So, using your 4mm hex wrench, go ahead and remove these 4 bolts. We'll go ahead and set these aside in a safe place. You're going to use them again in just a moment. So now we want to make sure that the wires aren't twisted, and we have our rear brake and our shifter over on the rider's right-hand side. That's going to leave the control unit and the throttle over here on the left-hand side. Using the display bracket as a guide, go ahead and just line up the bars so that we can see those 4 holes. Slide underneath the wire, the stem bracket, and go ahead and reattach those 4 bolts. You want to be careful when doing this. They should go in nice and easy. don't cross thread them, and do not over tighten. So we just want to get these snug enough that the handlebar stays in place. You can start to look at the alignment side to side at this point, but we'll take care of the roll angle once we get the bike down on the ground. Now that we have the handlebars mounted onto the stem and somewhat in place, we can go ahead and check for any of these disconnected wires. It makes it easy because these wires can only connect to each other. You can't hook them up improperly. So go ahead and line up the little arrows on the connectors. Go ahead and make sure these are all plugged in and secure. Next, we'll go ahead and install the pedals. Locate the pedals in your accessory box. Go ahead and pull them out of their little spot and remove the bubble wrap packaging. Each pedal has a specific left and a right. So you want to look near the spindle for the R or the L to identify which is the right and which is the left. On some models, you'll find that on the end of the pedal spindle. So first locate the right pedal with the R on it. That's going to represent the rider's right side, also described as the drive side of the bike because this is where we have the drivetrain. The left side is also referred to as the brake side because that's where the brakes are. So, starting with our right side or drive side pedal, we're going to very carefully just thread the pedal in place. This is going to be a traditional thread, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So this will thread in clockwise. And a good way to remember which way pedals rotate is they always rotate towards the front of the bike when you're looking at it from a side angle. You can go ahead and spin it on by hand as close as you can get. And then using the included 15mm wrench or a pedal wrench from our professional toolkit, we can go ahead and secure this up. We just want it to be snug. We don't want to over tighten it. Next, we'll do the same thing on the left side. So it's important when installing the left side pedal that this pedal is reverse threaded. So it's going to thread in anti-clockwise. And again, it's going to rotate towards the front of the bike. Now that we've got the pedals installed, the next thing we'll do is install the front wheel. Installation of the front wheel will be slightly different based on which model of bike you have. To begin the installation of the front wheel on the Apex or Ridge Runner bikes featuring the inverted fork, we'll start by loosening the axle clamps, which are the 4mm bolts located below the axle on each fork leg. We don't need to fully remove the bolts, just get them loose so that the axle can spin and move freely. Grab the axle firmly. Go ahead and spin the retaining bolt off of the axle on the brake side. Just a few spins. We'll go ahead and remove that bolt. Go ahead and set that aside. And at this point, we should be able to slide the axle straight out of the fork legs. Because this is an inverted fork, the fork legs can spin. This is totally normal. We'll get them all realigned as we put the whole assembly together. Okay, so now that we have the axle removed, we can go into the brake caliper and remove the small plastic spacer that's keeping the brake pads separated. At this point, we want to be very careful not to touch the front brake lever so that we can keep that separation of the pads and go ahead and slide the front wheel into place. So we'll go ahead and slide the front wheel into place, have the axle ready to go. And we're just going to have the axle just ever so slightly inside the right fork leg. We're going to bring the wheel into place, line up the rotor and the caliper, and then go ahead and drive the axle through the hub. Line it up with the brake side fork leg. Using your 5mm hex key, we go ahead and put the retaining bolt back into the axle. We're going to go ahead and spin that until it gets nice and snug. Best way to know if it's tight enough is wiggle the wheel back and forth and see if there's any play. If you still have some play, it means we need to tighten the axle up just a bit more. At this point, make sure both the brake side and the drive side nuts on either side of the axle are secure. So we'll go ahead and tighten up the clamps on each fork leg using our 4mm hex wrench. We don't want to over tighten these, but we do want to get them to about 7 Newton meters, which is a good snug turn of the wrist. If you're using the tools out of the professional toolkit, make sure you always use the flat end of the tool to fully secure the nut. Don't use the round end. To install the front wheel on our Warrior and other level bikes with a vertical dropout, first thing you'll do is go ahead and loosen up the nuts on either end of the axle and slide the washer all the way out so it's against the nut. We're going to do that on both sides. Make sure that the brake rotor is closest to you when you're on the brake side. This is the left side. We're going to slowly line up the wheel. We're going to line the brake rotor up inside the caliper. Best to have the axle down below the dropout. And then slowly lift up and slide the axle up into place. Want to make sure that the washer is sitting between the frame and the nut. So at this point, we're just going to lift up to hold the wheel upright. And go ahead and get these nuts nice and snug. And then using our 15mm wrench, we're just going to get these nuts just snug so that the wheel doesn't fall out. Once we have it in here, we'll go ahead and set the bike on the ground and let gravity help us to make sure that the wheel is nice and centered inside the dropout. So now that we have the bike on the ground, we can use gravity to kind of help us make sure that the wheel is centered inside the dropout. So to do this, I'm going to just slightly loosen back up the nuts that are holding the axle in place. A little bit loose on each side. Now we can see how the wheel can actually move side to side in here fairly easily. So getting up on top, pressing down, even pressure pushing down will keep the wheel centered in the dropout. So while pressing down here, we'll go ahead and tighten up our axle nuts. And we want to get these pretty snug, but don't go over tighten them like a lug nut. And that's how we install the front wheel with vertical dropouts. To install the front wheel in the Quantum, we'll start by removing the maxle axle from your RockShox fork. To do that, open the bail. Now we need to line up the bail with the small groove in the axle head. That way we can get a good grip, give it a spin, and we're going to unthread from the brake side. Once it's unthreaded from the brake side, we can go ahead and pull it straight on out. I like to just preset it in the drive side a little bit. That way we can take our wheel, lining up our brake rotor into our brake caliper. I'm going to slowly come up, putting the rotor into the caliper. And then to go ahead and drive the axle through the hub till we feel it click. When we feel it click, adding a little bit of pressure, again making sure the bail is in the groove, spin the axle, and we're going to thread until we make contact. At this point, we can then move the bail to any orientation and go ahead and close it up. We want the closing orientation of the bail to be straight upwards or possibly even a little bit towards the rear of the bike. This is so if we're riding along in tall grass, we can't get something caught that'll rip the axle open and loosen the front wheel. Once everything's nice and tight, you're good to go. Now we can go ahead and lower the bike to the ground and fine-tune all of our controls. So now that we have the bike on the grounds, we can go ahead and get our handlebars adjusted properly and fine-tune all of our hand controls so everything is nice and comfortable. So to start, we'll go ahead and just slightly loosen our stem bolts. And we don't want to go all the way, just loose enough that we can freely rotate the handlebar forward and backward, and then also so we can move it side to side. So we'll start by making sure it's nice and centered, side to side, left to right. And then we're going to roll the handlebars back so that the sweep is parallel to the ground. So the handlebar has an up sweep. It also has a back sweep. What we want to make sure is that the up sweep leaves the grip of the handlebar parallel to the ground. And we can do that by getting low looking down the bar until the grip is nice and flat. Then we'll go ahead and square off by tightening our stem bracket. When we do this, we want to make sure that on the top and the bottom, the gap between the bracket and the stem remains the same, so we have equal pressure keeping this thing on there. Once you get everything into place, go ahead and tighten up those 4 stem bolts. Remember not to over tighten them. If you have a torque wrench, 7 Newton meters is the amount of torque to be applied to each one of these bolts. If you don't have a torque wrench, best thing to do is just spin the bolt until you feel it get tight, and give it a quick little turn, and that's as tight as you'll need to go. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and fine tune exactly where all of our levers are. So using our 4mm Allen wrench, we can adjust the brake levers. Using our 5mm Allen wrench, we can adjust the shifter. Just loosen these up a little bit. And then we can rotate them on the bar to figure out exactly the perfect position of comfort. When you tighten your controls back to the handlebar, you want to make sure that they're tight enough that while you use the control, they don't move, but loose enough that if we crash, they can still move up and down instead of braking. Once we have all the controls adjusted, we can go ahead and power on the bike, check our battery levels, and take her out for the first ride. If you have any questions or want further information on how to adjust, fine-tune, or repair your QuietKat bike, check out our videos on maintenance at www.quietkat.com.